2022 priorities are going to build on our priorities from last year.
As lawmakers kick off a short session in Olympia, there's urgency to fix some past legislation.
Making sure that everyone in Washington State has an affordable access to long-term care.
And there's a continued debate over advances on police accountability.
Something I'll be watching for is to see if the proposal to independently prosecute cases of police deadly force will pass this year.
What pressing issues will Seattle's delegation of leaders in Olympia focus on in the weeks ahead?
It is in everyone's interest to keep folks in their homes.
Our panel of lawmakers weighs in.
We're really in uncertain times and the needs are great.
Our 2022 legislative preview, next on City Inside Out. Welcome to this edition of City Inside Out. I'm your host, Brian Callanan. Getting any major bills passed in the state legislature's 60-day short session, which starts January 10th, is always a tall order. That's even more the case in 2022. For the second year, the pandemic will impact how lawmakers assemble and vote, as the rapidly moving Omicron variant continues to affect residents across the state. But there's plenty to be done beyond responding to COVID. From fixing a problematic long-term care payroll tax to expanding the state's response to homelessness and making progress on police reform. Seattle area lawmakers say this short session will be full of challenges, but they're also promising it'll be full of action. The state legislature starts its work this January dealing with multiple pressure points. It's a 60-day short session during an election year with a pandemic that's simply not going away.
COVID is top of mind. It is the priority.
Austin Jenkins of Northwest Public Radio says, expect another hybrid session in Olympia like 2021 with online testimony and lawmakers not voting in person anytime soon as Omicron variant cases surge across the state.
And that seems to be a moving target day by day. And for the legislature, as they move to enact policy and pass the supplemental budget.
Senator Rebecca Saldaña of the 37th District in Southeast Seattle and Renton says 2022 will build on last year's progressive priorities.
We need to make sure that we're leading with equity.
That means continued COVID recovery for small businesses and BIPOC communities especially. But there's another crisis brewing over the long-term care insurance bill the legislature passed in 2019.
So I think they're going to come in and fairly quickly hit the pause button.
Washington Cares, which was set to take a 0.58% tax from workers' paychecks January 1st, was delayed by the governor last month.
For something like this to work at a state level, you need as full participation as possible.
450,000 people elected to opt out from the program, which is intended to help workers pay for long-term care. But critics say Washington Cares does not help disabled veterans, workers who live out of state, or people near retirement, concerns Saldaña says the legislature will respond to.
We're trying to create something that helps us address our elder the tsunami that we have of folks that are aging. There's not something that's out there working right now.
Please. Another big issue to tackle is police reform, especially last year's House Bill 1310 that limited officer use of force. It's now impacted how officers deal with subjects who are mentally ill.
There are a lot of police departments that have decided that they can no longer engage when no crime has been committed, but somebody is in a mental health or behavioral health crisis.
Saldaña says police are part of a team approach to mental health crises, and she wants lawmakers to clarify when officers need to be involved.
The issue is that there's a higher stake in terms of making sure that they respond correctly. And what I've heard is that there's commitment from all sides to help provide more clarity.
That's not the only police reform issue this year.
The conversations I've been having in the 37th has been a lot about the use of force bill.
Representative Kirsten Harris-Talley of the 37th District is also concerned about House Bill 1054 passed last year, which limits the use of tear gas, bans chokeholds, and says officers need probable cause to start a car chase. Some critics say the bill didn't go far enough.
We still have a long way to go to be there. Obviously, we've had still a lot of losses for families.
Harris-Talley is also focused on helping homeowners with property taxes in the wake of the pandemic. And she supports a new statewide push from Governor Inslee on homelessness.
I am so glad that we're finally picking this up and having a comprehensive look at it at the state level.
The governor is touting a new $815 million plan to respond to homelessness statewide. But with that, he wants to require cities to provide more places to build multifamily housing.
And the way you do that, he thinks, is by telling cities, you don't have a choice but to allow some more flexibility.
That could lead to pushback in some areas. But Harris-Talley says, with federal COVID relief money coming in, our state needs to make an impact on homelessness right away.
What we have right now is a really rare opportunity where there's going to be federal dollars at play that's about building infrastructure. Now is absolutely the right time to be having the conversation.
It's time for many conversations in Olympia about homelessness, police reform, long-term care, and more in the third straight legislative session challenged and shaped by the COVID pandemic.
I think that our democracy depends on people staying engaged.
It's not a session to sleep on. We're still going to be having big conversations and talking about big solutions for our neighbors.
And joining us to discuss this issue, we have a few of our Seattle area legislators with us, including Representative Nicole Macri from the 43rd District, the Democrat there, and also Senator Jamie Pedersen, the Democrat from the 43rd. Thank you both for joining me. And Senator Peterson, I want to start with you here. You are the state Senate's majority floor leader. You also serve on the Rules Committee. I want to get the latest on how the legislature will conduct this year's session. As of a few weeks ago, I know lawmakers were planning on being back in person, at least for some floor votes. But what's the situation right now with this major spike we're seeing in these Omicron variant cases?
Yeah, unfortunately, we had our rules all ready to go with the idea that we would all be together on the floor for all of our floor action. Like the House, we were already planning to do all committee meetings virtually this session. And unfortunately, given the spike in Omicron, we have made the decision that we're going to revert to something more like last year's process. So we'll have 15 members present on the floor in Olympia, along with the Lieutenant Governor and the rostrum staff. The other members will be participating remotely initially. We're hoping that that will last just for the first few weeks of session, so that by the time we are through with our committee action and move into the heavy floor days, that we'll all be together on the floor for that work.
Okay. Thank you for breaking that down. Representative Macri, I'll go to you on this. This is now, I guess you could say, year 3 that COVID has had an impact on the legislature and the health of our state, too. You're vice chair of appropriations in the House. You also serve on the Health Care and Wellness Committee. I want your thoughts on how COVID will affect the work that you do this year, and also what the legislature is going to be doing to help people in our state recover.
Yeah, thanks for that, Brian. I think all of us in Washington State are experiencing the Omicron wave right now. And so that really is sort of influencing, both just our processes, as you heard from Senator Peterson, but also our priorities. And we knew even before this latest variant wave that we're in a time of great uncertainty in terms of our economic outlook, as well as just sort of the well-being of Washingtonians. So we come to session with that in mind, that we have some urgent needs we need to attend to in terms of public health and the well-being of folks across the state. And we need to work prudently because we really don't know what's ahead. As the pandemic has shown us, it has taken us on quite a ride, and that we need to be ready and prepared for any multiple twists and turns in the future. And so both on our budget work as well as our policy work, we'll be really focused on the greatest needs of Washingtonians, the most urgent needs. I will say the budget that the governor gave us to start the conversation is a far more robust supplemental budget than maybe we have seen ever, but certainly not in a long time. And so the work will be intense and happening quickly because we do only have 60 days.
That's right. Representative Macri, let me stick with you for this next question here. So the governor also put a pause on Washington Cares last month. This is that long-term care insurance bill that would have enacted a payroll tax at the start of this year. So there's been a lot of pushback on this from the public. 450,000 people elected to opt out of it last year. What's the plan for Washington Cares this session? I see that there's a bill in the House to delay this until the middle of next year. Tell us what's going on.
Yeah, so Democrats were really interested in making sure we could come into the 22 session and make needed reforms to the program. There is a lot of conversation and I think effort out there to actually take this benefit away from Washingtonians. And I think we need to stay the course on it and make sure that we put the necessary reforms in place to really ensure that it is an equitable program and that it meets its goals, which are to really ensure safety and security, in particular for our seniors, and to help our families in Washington avoid bankruptcy. I mean, many families have faced this when they've had to face these difficult decisions about increasing care for folks in their families as they get older. So in order for this program to work, we need to put the reforms in place. Delaying the start of the program until the middle of next year will allow us to enact those, implement them, and then start the program with a fresh start. So that's what we're looking to do. And we're actually coming out of the gate with a hearing on those bills in the first couple of days of session.
Good to hear. Senator Peterson, I just want to get your thoughts on Washington Cares here. You've got veterans, you got retirees, you got people who work in Washington but live out of state. They all have some concerns here. I know there's also another House bill that would get some of these people, get more of these people to opt out, but really getting more participation, not less, is what's going to help this program succeed. What needs fixing with Washington Cares? What are lawmakers going to be talking about this session and next session too?
So I guess I want to emphasize what Representative Macri was saying. We know that there is a tsunami of folks coming toward our long-term care system that need help. And it is in everyone's interest to keep folks in their homes as long as possible, not to have them have to go to skilled nursing facilities. So this is a pioneering program. We're the first state in the country that's tried to do something like this. It's not surprising that there are some kinks that we're going to have to work out. I think you mentioned some of them. The issue of people who live in a different state but work in Washington and therefore are paying for it but are not eligible for benefits.
Right.
So there are several of those things that are that we can fix this session, and we're going to do that. But one of the reasons for delaying the program until the middle of 2023 is that it gives the commission itself that oversees the program time to do some real study and evaluation about changes that we can make and figure out what that does to the solvency of the program, so that the 2023 legislature can come back and, before the program goes into effect, have the legislature make some additional changes to it.
Okay.
So that is the plan. I don't want to prejudge what all those changes, what the right changes might be, but we have certainly heard from a lot of people as the program came close to its January 1st date about suggestions for reforms.
Okay, thank you. Senator Peterson, I want to stick with you to talk about police use of force issues. You chair the Senate's Law and Justice Committee. I want to split this into two parts if I could. The types of less lethal force that police can use, like tear gas, et cetera, car chases involved with that, the gist of House Bill 1054, and then when police are allowed to use force, House Bill 1310. So first, the types of force that officers can use. Senate or Republicans, state Republicans, I should say, on the House and Senate side, have put out a package of new bills. They're calling it Safe Washington. They're saying crime's on the rise in our state. The majority party dropped the ball last session, was one quote from them. Police officers need more tools, not fewer, I should say, to do their jobs. Just your response to that as you go into this session.
Yeah, so I guess, first of all, I'd like to say, in the big picture, the way that I look at it, we all experienced a really significant crisis in equity in policing in our country and in our state. You know, it's not only George Floyd's death, but the death of Manny Ellis, for example, here locally. that illustrated real problems in the way that our criminal justice system and law enforcement had been approaching that work. And so we did a package of, depending on how you count, 13, 14, 15 bills last session. So first, I think it's worthwhile to keep in mind that we made a lot of change. And in some ways, what's most remarkable is not that there are some issues that we need to clarify, but that all but 2 of the bills have gone into effect without causing much trouble at all.
Okay.
So there are those 2 bills that you mentioned where we have some tweaking to do. Mostly, I think it's just a matter of communicating clearly what we intended. So the legislature never intended that police not be able to use force, for example, to put somebody into involuntary treatment who is posing a danger to self or to others, right? So, but I appreciate that as a lawyer myself, I realize when there are 10 lawyers in the room, there are 11 different opinions. So we can be better about making sure that we're clear that that's the case, that law enforcement has that ability to use force in those cases.
Got it.
I think similarly, we had a broad prohibition on military style weapons. Right. And that's been interpreted to mean that police are unable to use some less lethal alternatives like beanbag rounds. And that was not our intention either. But, it's our fault that it isn't as clear as it could be. And so there are going to be a couple of bills coming out of the House. Both of those were House bills. So there are going to be a couple of bills that we've worked very collaboratively on over the summer that are going to make those clarifications. I expect that they will sail through the legislature and make it to the governor's desk. And as with long-term care, as we were just talking about, it would be very surprising if we made change on the scale that we were trying to make last session and not have some things that we need to continue to refine with the benefit of experience. So that's the project that we're going to be engaged in this session.
Thanks very much. Representative Macri, I want to shift to this idea of when it's appropriate for officers to use force, especially with behavioral health crisis situations. And Senator Peterson alluded to this just a few minutes ago. You're deputy director with the Downtown Emergency Service Center here in Seattle. You've encountered plenty of these types of situations before. And so it's been reported that in many cases, police are not even engaging with people that are going through mental health crises for fear of violating what the legislature established last year with House Bill 1310. Talk to us about this, your experience, what you've gone through at the DESC, and what message you want to put through to police on this issue of when they can use force.
Yeah, I want to start off by saying there's been a lot of great work that has happened over the recent years in the stronger collaboration between behavioral health crisis response workers and law enforcement. And that's not only true in Seattle, where I actually think we've been incredibly innovative and forward thinking in those kinds of collaborations, but in areas all across Washington state. And police interpretation and need for more clarity on the new use of force statutes has certainly set back some of that collaboration. So the work that we'll do this session, we have a bill from Representative Jesse Johnson that clarifies the continued role that officers can play, not only with the transfers, the transports that are often so essential to get people who are in crisis, who are not in a mental state to be able to voluntarily consent to going for more care. In those rare cases where we need a police assistance to transport folks for involuntary commitment, the bill we have will clarify that. But it will also clarify that officers can and should assist in what we call community caretaking call. So when behavioral health workers or EMTs or homeless shelter workers call for assistance, that officers don't need to worry that that will be interpreted as a use of force. So the statute is very clear about the need for officers to work to de-escalate situations and to only use force as the last option. And the bill that we'll consider this year will clarify that. And we've had incredibly great input from law enforcement as well as from behavioral health folks from around the state on that.
Got it. And we will look forward to seeing that debate play out over the next couple of weeks. Representative Macri, let me stick with you on this issue of homelessness. Governor Inslee was in Ballard last month talking about expanding our state's investment in housing and shelter with $815 million in the supplemental budget, more than 2/3 of that coming from federal COVID relief money. And this is building on last session's investment of $2 billion into homelessness. He's talking about building new permanent housing, shelter, all sorts of things, helping people with utility bills. What do you think of this plan, and what do you think should be done with this money statewide?
Yeah, well, I was honored to be there when the governor made that announcement a few weeks ago here in Seattle. And I'm very heartened. I met with the governor, actually, Representative Chop, also from the 43rd, and I met with Governor Inslee along with Senator Frocht to talk about the growing challenges of homelessness, not only in our home districts here in Seattle, but around the state, and the need for bold action. And so we're really grateful the governor has taken this step and really building upon the investments the legislature made in the 2021 session. So I think he hit the mark really on a focus on housing. We know that housing is the solution to homelessness. We know that people need supports often before there is enough housing for people to get into. So the governor's plan does assume the need for emergency or short-term housing or non-congregate shelter. It proposes new outreach resources for unhoused people across the state, and has a real focus on more investments in behavioral health crisis response, because we know there's a close connection between the issues of homelessness and people who are experiencing behavioral health crisis in our community. So it's a strong proposal, and I'm hopeful that we'll give it serious consideration this session.
Thanks very much for that. Senator Peterson, I'll go to you on this. One important point of the governor's proposal was an idea to require cities with 25,000 people or more to allow for more multifamily housing. He's talking about essentially overriding some city laws that designate areas as specifically single-family neighborhoods. I know this is an ongoing debate here in the city of Seattle. How do you think this is going to play out here and in other smaller cities around the state?
That is a good question, and I don't know if I can predict the answer. Just honestly, we have an ongoing tension in Olympia about circumstances in which we want to make decisions in Olympia, as opposed to circumstances when we want decisions to be made closer to where people actually live, by their city councils or county councils. And I think it's fair to say that no matter how principled we try to be about it, all of us find ourselves on different sides of that question, depending on what the particular policy is.
Sure.
And on this policy, I guess, my take is that where there are substantial public investments, for example, around the light rail system, that we're busy investing billions and billions of dollars in, there's very little excuse for maintaining single-family housing in close proximity to those facilities that we're investing in. It's a region-wide system. It's designed to facilitate region-wide transit, and in close proximity to those facilities, probably it's appropriate that local jurisdictions lose some capacity to make those single-family decisions. When you get further away from that, I don't know. I have more sympathy for the arguments, I guess, on both sides about allowing communities to make their own decisions if there isn't some big public investment that's implicated. So, and I think, probably because of that mixed view, that's a question that's very much up in the air as far as how the legislature will choose to resolve the issue.
Okay, as always, I appreciate your candor on that. Senator Peterson, we need to start moving towards wrapping up the show. I want to talk about another issue we maybe haven't discussed yet. You got a lot of Republicans in Olympia talking about sales tax cuts with our state surplus at a 20-year high. Do you have any appetite for that or any other topic you want to discuss?
I guess what I would say is we have a lot of uncertainty about where we're headed in terms of the budget. We have a lot of money, as Representative Macri said, that's available. A lot of that is one-time money. And so I think we have been very cautious in the budgeting about making sure that one-time money is paired with one-time uses, and that we don't undertake ongoing obligations that we're not going to have the ability to pay for. I think a similar principle holds true in terms of cutting ongoing revenue sources. We know that we have substantial needs for investment in our state, and chief among those, and where most of the sales tax money goes, is to our public schools and educating our kids, right? That the need for that is not going to be less when the pandemic is in the rearview mirror. And so I guess I'm anxious about making long-term commitments, about changing the limited tax revenue streams that we have available to us in a time when we have a fair amount of uncertainty. I do want to make sure that we use the money that we have wisely. And in particular, one of the things that I was a big advocate for last year was using some of the one-time money that we had to pay off the entire unfunded liability in the teachers' retirement system, and I think PERS 1 and TERS 1 were our only underfunded pension liabilities. Those are good examples of things that we can do that will free up future resources, and then make it possible potentially in future years to make different decisions. But
okay. Thank you for that. Representative Macri, we're tight on time, but some final thoughts maybe on this tax cut idea, some other thoughts out there, another issue that we haven't discussed here. Anything you want to discuss here?
I'll say I agree with Senator Peterson's take on the fact that we're really in uncertain times and the needs are great. I know I've talked with a lot of neighbors around concerns around access to healthcare, right? Folks have said, I don't even want to go to the doctor. I don't know if I have COVID or if I have a cold, but I know the entire healthcare system is backed up. So we will spend a lot of time this session really talking about our healthcare workforce. So our hospital workers, our frontline health workers, our long-term care workers, we're seeing shortages, extreme shortages. And while we have been focusing on healthcare, and last year we put a big focus on our childcare workforce, and we'll continue to focus on them, I think we'll see a lot of effort on stabilizing our workers in healthcare. So it's just another example of the kinds of investments we need to be considering during these uncertain times.
Okay, that's all the time we have for now. Thank you both. Have a great session ahead, and we will be right back. What are people saying on social media about this year's legislative session? House Democrats write, "We're looking ahead to 2022 with a renewed commitment to serving the people of Washington." But Senate Republicans say Democrats are still championing more anti-police and soft-on-crime legislation. Legislative Republicans are united in strong opposition to these bills. We'd like to know what you think. Send us an email at contact@seattle.gov or find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Coming up next week, Seattle's eviction moratorium expires on January 15th. What will happen to renters who have fallen behind? And will Mayor Bruce Harrell extend the deadline for a 7th time? That's all on the next City Inside Out. I hope you join us.